All right, folks. Today I'm joined by Joe Gambino. Myself and Joe cross paths in an online mentorship program. And I wanted to get Joe on because his content is fantastic about all things injuries. And I think you're going to get a huge amount of value from hearing his thoughts and opinions on these topics today. So Joe, let's jump in, mate. Let's talk about how you got into the industry and how you got to do what you're doing today.
Yeah, thanks, Connor. Thanks for having me on the show. Appreciate it. But yeah, I got into the industry 2007, I believe. I started personal training then, and then my experience working with those who have been injured had led me into to go to PT school, physical therapy school in 2010, and then graduated and all that stuff, and here we are today. Funny enough, I was actually a computer science major before all that. Was interested in finance even before that. So I was really ping ponging around. And then just my experience in the gym with how it made me feel, with just kind of falling in love with it. I found that I was asking people in the gym like more questions about like nutrition and what I should be doing there than I was actually in my own studies. So that's kind of what like spurred me to even go study exercise in the first place, and just kind of fell in love with it from there. And that's kind of been the whole progression through my career from there.
Wow, man, that's a long time. I didn't know you were PTing that long. I'm like
Yeah.
2012, 2007. So how old are you now?
I'm dating myself. I'm 36.
Oh, 36. Okay. So
Be 37 in a couple months.
you were like 16, 17, 18 when you started PTing?
Yeah. Yep, pretty much.
Great, man. Okay. And then you did computer science, and then you were kind of 2021 and you decided to go into physical therapy. Is that right?
Well, I was studying exercise science at that point, and then just based on my experience as a trainer, it just kind of led me into physical therapy school because it just somehow I got the rep for working with people who were either finishing physical therapy or had some nagging injuries, and I just figured there was a deeper dive for me to go through to help these people out because I mean I was helping people, but going through physical therapy school, understanding pain and going through that process really helped me, I guess, streamline that process so I can help people get out of pain faster, get back to fitness and all that stuff. So it's been a positive journey from that perspective.
Yeah, let's maybe go into that, mate. So let's kind of think about when you were personal training, your approaches, and then how that shifted with your PT experience, like going through that whole process, understanding the pain science and all these things.
Sure. So it's changed. I mean, if we talk about day one, it's changed dramatically. Day one is what I used to do was bodybuilding when I first started working out. So based on my personal experiences, everyone who came through the door to see me got something similar, right? So it was all kind of bodybuilding splits and things like that. Shortly after maybe a couple of years in the industry, I started doing strength and conditioning work. Came across the likes of Mike Boyle and Eric Cressy and all that stuff. So then originally those philosophies had changed to jive with that stuff, which became more terrible word to use, functional training, but we'll use it because that's the buzzword in the industry. So more strength and conditioning type stuff. That's still kind of the base for what I do. But going through physical therapy school and becoming a physio has just changed the lens with how I look at pain. So it doesn't change how I train people, but it does change how, if someone is injured, how I might attack that, right? Instead of looking at like ratings of perceived exertion or percentages max as like how hard someone should be training. If someone's injured, we look at more of like rating of perceived symptom, so what kind of load can they tolerate before things pop up, they feel more stiff, there's more pain, things like that. So we just shift the lens of how we're loading them, so we treat almost like the fitness side of things as the rehab side of things if there's injured tissue, and then we just progress them and overload them until they're at a point for where they can get back to performance. um, a lot when I got out of PT school with the place that I worked, we did a lot of like functional range conditioning systems stuff. So mobility work has also become a big part of what I do. So a little bit more than just generalized stretching. As you know, mobility is as trying to create as much active range of motion and control as possible. So it's how can we start to give joints the ability to do what they need to do, expand on how much active control that they have, so people can become more resilient, feel better, and enjoy the activities that they love doing.
Dude, you've kind of just glossed over things really, really elegantly there. So I'd love
Thank
for
you.
you to dive into more detail because I'm just kind of like, you've shared so much gold there. Um, is that RPS? I've never heard that. Rating of perceived symptoms.
Yes, yeah, that's something I don't exactly know where I came up with it from. I heard the term somewhere, but I was always using something similar where you just we're always looking at. So there are like pain guidelines that I follow, and I pretty sure I found them from a research article somewhere, and they've been working really well for me as far as like return to activity stuff. So they've kind of stuck around, and the idea is that we don't really want pain to get over a 4 out of 10 in intensity. So, someone common pitfall someone has, especially during rehab processes, they start feeling better. Then all of a sudden they come back and they tell me there's a flare up, and usually that's because they started doing more activity. And we know that large jumps in activity stresses on the body will tend to cause flare ups. And I think it's a great sign because someone's feeling more confident in their body. They're challenging themselves more. So that flare up is just a really small hurdle that we have to get over. But it starts to tell me that we're really close to the finish line as far as their rehab goes. But having those pain guidelines of not getting over a 4, nothing lasting more than 2 days, really helps people understand that, okay, if I go out and I'm going to use running for whatever reason, and I go out and run a 5K, and all of a sudden my pain levels get to a 6, I have this flare up, it lasts for 3, 4, 5, 7 days, whatever it is. Well, they start to understand that what they did was too much. I understand that it's too much, but it helps them understand that, okay, this pain response is potentially negative. This pain response is potentially positive, right? If it's a 2 or 3, goes away within 24 hours. I say that's a positive stress response that's actually going to help those tissues progress over time. You just can't increase activity levels, right? So there are parameters that people can follow, and it helps them feel more self-sufficient, right? So that they're not so nervous and fearful about what they're about to go through, right? Because a lot of people who have pain, biggest thing I hear from them is that I'm scared to do X, right? And like they don't want to squat because their back hurts. They don't want to run because their knee hurts. But once we start to change the lens that this sort of pain is okay, this is actually positive stress. This pain is a potential negative stress. If we do this a whole lot of times, that's when we might start to see issues with flare ups and things like that. It's not going to happen in like instant, right? Like you do it one time, you're going to, take 100 steps backwards and be in pain forever. So it helps people stay a little bit more um, I don't know what's the exact word, but it keeps them on the right track and just a better understanding of what they can accomplish.
Okay, this is really important stuff that I want people to really listen to. So basically, when you're doing rehab on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 is like maximal pain.
Send
You
you
want
to
to
the
keep
ER.
that
Yeah.
you want to keep that scale below a 4, 4 below. And then if you do whatever exercise or you do your routine and you get a flare up, but it's still at 4 or below and it clears up within 48 hours, that's still okay. Is that right?
That's all right. Yep. I would tell those people that those workout sessions should not change in volume or intensity at any point in time because you're already showing that there's some sort of increased tightness, there's some sort of increased discomfort, soreness, whatever it is. So that load is going to be where you need. So you just need to take whatever time off for you to come back to your baseline and then continue those exact same sessions until your body adapts. And once it does, then you just bump up the response by 10% or so. And then this is a very slow progression of things. And that prevents that kind of like yo-yoing effect that could happen where someone's going out and they go run 5 miles, they feel like they have pain, they have to rest for a week or two, then they go run 5 miles again, they have pain, they have to rest for a week or two, and then all of a sudden there's discouragement that happens. So it really helps prevent that, the slow building of tissue tolerance over time.
Okay. Yeah, that's really helpful. So, what advice can you give to someone who they have a lower back issue? This is what used to happen to me. So I'd love to hear your insights. Now my back is okay, but unfortunately
Mm-hmm.
we're talking like two years too late. But what would happen to me was I kept training the whole time, but I would get the flare up. And then I think I've heard another physio call it the downward anxiety spiral. So I would start freaking out about my back hurting. and then everything would seem to get worse. Even though if
Mhm.
I was being objective, like, oh, it's probably still only a 3 or 4, but I'd be like, oh my God, I'm back to square one. So if someone's doing, following your advice, but they're feeling like they're starting to panic, what sort of tips or tools can you give them or share with them today?
Yeah, that's where having somebody to guide you through that process becomes important because they can tell you and from an objective experience that this is okay. But it's a perfectly normal response for somebody, right? I mean, especially if you've been dealing with pain for a while, and I'm in the same boat as you. I've had lower back pain for a long time. And anytime there's a flare up, right, your mind goes, "Oh my goodness," right? And I tell people to process those emotions, right? Those are perfectly fine things to, they're normal things to feel. But then at the end of it, once you've processed it, you have to just go back and look at what's kind of going on, right? Are you still able to do more than what you were doing in the past? Is your pain still coming down relatively quickly? From my personal experience, when I had flare ups, I used to have like one flare up a year that would put me on the shelf where like I couldn't even find a comfortable position. And that would last for about a day or two. And then I'd have these periodic flare ups that can last for, 2, 3 weeks at a time. Now, when I have a flare up, they don't really linger around for more than, a couple hours, really, so when you think of it from like that, right? Like, oh, well, I used to have pain all the time for years, but now when I have a flare up, it's a three and it lasts for 24 hours. I mean, that response is completely different, right? So you can, oh my goodness, what's going on in that moment? But then at the end of it, when you recover, I mean, realize your recovery time for these things is much faster. You're more resilient at this point, so your body is more capable. So again, that's probably harder because once you're wrapped, and depending on your anxiety levels and how you really feel about your pain levels. I mean, we do know that your beliefs, your stress levels, pain is multifactorial. So a downward spiral like that can also increase someone's pain response, and then that can just leave somebody in a worse place too. So there's a delicate balance there. So I do believe having somebody in your corner, whether it's physio, chiropractor, really great trainer who understands, especially if your pain levels aren't that bad and they're able to help you. I mean, you're just using them as a resource and then just trying to figure out what you can do to bring your pain back down to your baseline and then just getting back into things. And if you are anxious about it, you just get back into things slowly and just don't go back into the old volumes or whatever it is. And then just build your own confidence back up till you get to a level where you want to be.
Yeah, great advice, man. And it's so, I think just having that kind of sounding board of a professional as well to be like, no, no, you're okay. Like your last flare up was 6 months ago, and prior to that, it was every 3 months, and it's only one day today. This time, before it was 3 days that you'd be on the couch. So that's really helpful, mate. Um, Another PT I was talking to, I don't know the terminology, so I'm not sure if it's right, but he was saying like the injury identity, meaning that like I've got a I've had back pain for 10 years now, I've got a bad back, or it's wear and tear because I'm old. And like you were kind of talking there about the mindset and your belief system. So can you talk about the impact that these types of beliefs can have if someone is in this cycle of believing that anything they do they're going to put out their back, and how to kind of reframe stuff?
Yeah, so with pain being what we consider like multifactorial, meaning that there's multiple factors that can play into it. This is why someone who doesn't have anything that pops up on an MRI or two people with the exact same injury can have very, very different pain responses, because it's not just the tissue that causes pain, right? It's a nervous system response to a perceived threat in a sense. So if someone believes that their back is frail, it's going to break easily, there's nervousness, apprehension, right? You're almost, in a sense, training your nervous system to be even more protective over these things, right? So it can drive more pain. It can keep a pain response longer and things like that. And that's where language from our perspectives, right, as fitness professionals, physical therapists, chiropractors, doctors, there's a term called nocivic language, where it's language that has a perceived negative connotation to the listener, where it can actually cause more anxiety, more stress. So you go to the doctor, you get imaging, and they tell you have this generation disease, right? Sounds terrible, right? Like, oh my goodness, my back has this terrible disease now. It's frail and fragile. But the truth is that if you MRI, and they've done this on healthy spines with no pain, completely asymptomatic over time, um, as each decade passes, that there is more likelihood that things like that will pop up, right? So there's going to be more disc bulges, there's going to be more disc degeneration, there's going to be all these changes that happen. That same at the knee, more meniscus tears, more labral tears at the hip and the shoulder, all these things that pop up. And all it tells us is that these things are part of the normal aging process, right? So yeah, they can contribute to your pain response, but then all these other things on top of it can feed into it and potentially make things worse. And then obviously the way you train, your lifestyle, and all those other things can combine on top of it. So that's why pain becomes very complicated, way more complex than we'll probably ever fully understand. And probably why at this point chronic pain is such a rampant thing these days.
Yeah. So from your professional point of view, when do you get to the point where you decide to send someone to get like a scan, an MRI or something like that? Or are you, because a lot of the times the treatment outcome is going to be the same a lot of the time, right?
Yeah, so as far as like if I'm assessing somebody and you know, I don't know, like they're worried if they have labral tear, IT band syndrome. I don't know, like we just name like five different things in the same area that can happen, right? It doesn't fully matter to me what those things are because my assessment's going to drive what I'm going to do, right? It's always going to be what can we do to bring down pain, what we're going to be able to do to build up the characteristics that are limited as far as mobility and movement goes. And then how do we start to build up the tissue's resiliency as far as load, stress, forces? How do we make it stronger? It does make, like, we have special tests as physical therapists that are not the greatest, but can help us identify certain tissues because some things, if it's tendon related versus nerve tissue related, we'll probably need to attack those things differently. But overall, right, it's symptom first and then building up the physical characteristics that make you more move better, feel better, and things like that. So typically, unless there's a red flag that pops up, so there are certain things that require imaging right away, like bowel and bladder dysfunction, motor loss, significant weight loss in a really short period of time that was not intentional. Things that will show like these, like, maybe there's something really bad going on. You want to get those things MRI'd and cleared right away. Otherwise, if it just seems like, what I would consider normal findings, then it just becomes, does the recovery start to move in the direction that we want? Usually there's going to be some sort of improvement pretty quickly within the first couple of weeks, a month. There should be some sort of, I feel better, pain frequency is less, the pain intensity is less, something that's telling us that we're objectively moving in the right direction. If there's no change at all, like they come in and they're the same or worse after I've been seeing them for 2, 3, 4 weeks, then it's either refer out to somebody else because maybe I'm just not the best person for them, or maybe it's time to start looking at what are some alternative options to get over that pain hump, whether that's a pain management doctor, whether that's going for imaging, whatever that might look like.
Yeah, and I guess the common approach, which doesn't seem to make sense based on what you're saying, is like I have a lot of conversations, as you do as well, I'm sure, with people who have, let's just say, lower back pain. They go to a GP. The GP does a scan. The scan says they've got some sort of disc bulge or degeneration, and then the recommendation is painkillers. Um, a lot of times the people I'm talking to, they're in their 20s or 30s, and that's it. So like, if someone's listening and that's been their recommendation, what are some things that you would recommend that person? Like it might be like something like they were in a car accident, or it might be just like their back just starts twinging and getting increasingly worse for whatever reason. Like, what would be some objective steps that you see that a lot of people tend to benefit from with lower back pain, we'll say as an example?
Yeah, as far as pain medication goes, that's all really depends on how high someone's pain level is, how consistent it is, and things like that. So as far, if they feel that they need it, it's prescribed by the doctors. It's hard for me to say like They shouldn't be taking any of that stuff. Obviously, regardless if you're on opioids, the goal should be get off as soon as possible. I mean, we're in the midst of an opioid epidemic. They're obviously, you can get addicted to them and things like that, right? So they're not great long-term strategies for people. They're not going to solve your pain in any way, shape, or form, right? It's almost like putting a band-aid over a cut and then that's it, right? So always wanted to get down to the root cause of what's going on. How can we start to bring down pain? And as pain starts to come down, can we start to wean you off any medication that you're on? Is there anything else specifically you want to go? I mean, that's overall, like in an overall philosophy, how I look at it. I know you mentioned lower back pain, so if there's any specific questions there, we can dive deeper.
Yeah, I guess for me, I find that like sometimes that's the initial step is pain medication. So if someone doesn't want to take that route, like what would you be saying? Like, would it be more movement or looking at their environment, or would it be anything like that you'd be saying that could be some low-hanging fruit that the person could start, taking control of this issue?
Yeah, I mean, we're always looking at movement is usually a good bet. There's usually things that we can find that's going to reduce someone's pain, and then we're just going to want to double, triple up on the things that make them feel better, because that's going to help bring down the pain response more quickly than pain medication will, right? Because pain medication will do it in the short term, but without taking it consistently, right, your pain levels are just going to come back to where they were. So if we can find exercises or movements that will bring down your pain, that's going to be way more effective than anything else that you could be doing. And then you can use, if you needed to, right, you can use the pain medication if as needed, right? But there are a lot of people who don't want to take it, right? So these are the strategies you're going to do, right? Can you find some movements that are going to help? If there is like sitting for a long period of time is problematic, how do we start to break up the repetitive load of sitting, standing for long periods of time, whatever that might be? Repetitive stresses are usually a thing that can drive symptoms. So the more we can change those things and break up those stresses, the more success someone can have. So there are definitely things from the environment perspective and definitely from a movement perspective that we can do to start to again rehab, right? When we're looking at it, bring down pain first and then build up qualities that improve mobility, improve movement quality, improve strength, right? So that's kind of like the order in which you want to follow, right? It's very hard to build mobility and build performance characteristics when someone's in a lot of pain, right? So there are things that we can do to bring down the pain response for sure.
Got it, man. Yes, that's a nice framework. So it's always those three steps with your rehab. So it's like initially bring the pain symptoms down, and that can be medication sometimes or whatever activity. So it's either medication or activity. Would they be the two
I
main things
mean,
that you focus on?
medication is again like as needed. I'm never pushing anyone there. I personally never take medication unless it's 100% necessary, right? So you got movement. I mean, if foam rolling works for somebody and brings down their pain, you can foam roll, right? All these manual therapy techniques. If you like massage or acupuncture, I mean, anything that feels good to you, right? I just let people know that manual therapy is not gonna make changes for you, right? It's not going to be the thing that 3 months from now, if you only did these manual focuses, is going to help somebody get out of pain completely, but it can definitely help in the process. It does provide these windows of what I call a window of opportunity where you get a massage or you foam roll, you feel better, you have more, you pretty much have a little bit more mobility to work through. And then how can we start to load that thing, move through those things, and then build up those characteristics that are going to, you know, build a more resilient body in a sense.
Great. And then once you get that pain down, then we're looking at mobility and movements, and then finally building resiliency. Is resiliency generally with like more strength work and like jumping or plyometrics or running, like more impact stuff?
We're in so it's not, I wouldn't say it's like you have to do X before Y before Z, right? They're all very interchangeable. But in the beginning, say like, I don't know, you have a constant pain of like four all the time, right? We're going to be wanting to find the activities that don't increase that and then find activities that also reduce that, right? And then as pain comes down, and they have more better opportunity to move, then we start to add in some of those things that are more challenging for them, right? So, say squatting hurts your knees, and I know that you can hinge, right? So I can keep you in the gym. We can do hinge pattern work for the lower body. We can do upper body work, no problem. We can do core work, no problem. So you can stay in the gym and do the things that you like to do. On my goal, right, is how can I now improve the ability for your knee to get into squat patterns under load with the mobility and all that stuff, right? So then my assessment will tell me, does this person need mobility? Do they need strength? Do they need whatever it is, right? And I'm going to start to build up those qualities. Usually as those qualities build up, the pain will start to come down. And then all of a sudden now I'm able to reintroduce them to the movements that they were limited in the first place, right? That they couldn't do. So now we can start using squatting with rating a perceived symptom as part of their exercise program. And then as they start to build up, then now they get to rating a perceived exertion and all the performance-based measures that they would need to over time, right? And that's how, if we look at it globally, right, we always want to be moving them towards whatever their goals are, right? If they don't care about squatting, well, I still want their need to be able to do those things because you still have to squat in real life, but maybe it's not to the extent that somebody who does powerlifting and wants to be able to do the big three at a really high level. So again, right, goals will always dictate, what we're going to be doing in that pathway to get them there.
Yeah, you made a really important point there just about what the person's motivated to do. Like, there's no point pushing them to become massive squatters if they're just not interested. Um, have you seen patterns, we'll say, with people? Like, let's just use back pain as an example. Let's just say your sample is, people in their 40s or 50s. And are you seeing like, okay, unless they're in like a crazy accident or something, it's more like just of an overuse issue that their back just starts becoming an issue from decades of sitting, we'll say. Do you see like, okay, these, from seeing hundreds of clients, generally these two or three places are really weak or really stiff. And once we kind of fix them, a lot of the symptoms disappear.
Yeah, there are definitely commonalities. One is spinal segmentation. That typically um, is people lose the ability to segment their spines over time, right? So we know that
Can you explain that
spines,
for people?
yeah. So each individual, our spine is made up of a bunch of different segments, right? We have our cervical spine, thoracic, lumbar, right? All these different units. Each of those segments has the ability to kind of move on their own, right? They all have their own kind of little muscle group. There's distinct movement between each of them. And when we move, right, we expect that all segments are able to move in unison with each other. And that's what helps kind of the spine disperse forces, right? It's a way for the spine to, in essence, increase surface area. So it helps forces get dispersed there. When someone loses segmentation, and pretty much like they say you're going to bend forward and touch your toes, most of your spine ends up rounding, right, to do that. But then that segment that doesn't move, there's almost like a break there. So it's a non-uniform curve there. And then those segments that don't bend, they end up taking more force because it can't be dispersed, right? So spinal segmentation is one of those things that, from a joint perspective, we can use the term healthy, right? But tells me how well those joints are functioning, right? So it's always one thing that we want to clear up. And usually because we sit all the time, we're based on, our society, right? We're constantly sitting. Based on the way that we train, everything's done in neutral spine, right? We never really get out of it and explore these other motions. It's something that we lose because we're just not using over long term, right? So those are things that we definitely want to work on. And then overall, it's just range of motion is usually decreased in people as they get older, just because whether they're not training it or for whatever reason, but making sure that the spine has full flexion, extension, rotation, the hips move well. If the hips aren't moving well, that can lead to some lower back discomfort as well. Same thing up at the thoracic spine. We're not just looking at lower back, right? But we're looking at the entire spine and how it moves. So there are definitely commonalities as far as those things being big rocks as far as what can lead to some lower back pain.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, I've never thought about spinal segmentation, but it makes it so obvious now that you've just explained it like that. And it's pretty funny. I'm doing like Latin dancing, bachata dancing, and one of the
Mm-hmm.
moves is spinal waves, which is just like a fantastic way to segment the spine. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's good activity to do for people. But what I've realized doing this type of Latin dance is there's a lot of hip movements that we're doing where you're basically really manipulating the hip joint and the spine, and I'm like, whoa, I'm
Mm-hmm.
even though I'm a coach, I'm so disconnected from my spine and from my hips, very much so. Um, so would you say that the spine is the kind of the part of the body that people tend to be most disconnected from, or anywhere else?
Man, I mean, that can be anywhere really, and it really just depends on the person's history, their injury history, what they've done, right? Because if someone has chronic knee pain, say, right, like that's going to be one of those things that drives, right? Like they're going to have issues in that area, probably more so than they would at their back or somewhere else, right? So that's very dependent person to person and how it is. But yeah, I mean, most people, I can't say most people, but if I'm seeing somebody for anything around the back, the hips, right? Oftentimes I'm seeing things that happen from a hip mobility perspective and from a spine mobility perspective, segmentation, and all that fun stuff. So
Yeah. And just along that, mate, like some simple exercise would be something like a cat cow would be a good place to start.
So cat cow would be kind of like you're looking at global, right, movement. You can do it in a segmental fashion. So you try to move from like bottom to top or top down, trying to move one segment at a time. So that's one way you can work on spinal segmentation that way. You can also do it in more like chunk blocks. So you can break up camel as far as can you just move the lower back? Can you just move the thoracic spine, right? So you can break it up into chunks that way too. So it's not quite segment by segment, but taking the spine into bigger chunks to teach a little bit more segmentation that way. Create more awareness of what it's like to even move your thoracic spine and what it is to just move your lumbar spine. And then there are things that you can do from like standing, which we call like a wall peer, where your back is up against the wall, and then you're just kind of trying to peel one segment at a time off the wall, either into flexion or extension. And those are some other ways that you can start to create that feeling of segmentation in your spine.
Cool. Okay. So yeah, like a wall peel, which I'm pretty sure that's kind of like a lot of the Edo Portel would have kind of popularized that, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I don't know
But
where I picked up wall peels from, but even like you mentioned, like spinal waves, right? That's another exercise that you can use to drive spinal segmentation. You can do that cervical spine, you can do that anywhere, right? So that's those are all things that you can kind of pick up to work on it.
so what I'm hearing, mate, is basically if you just do Latin dancing, you're gonna fix your back
That's
pain.
it. Yeah, it might be.
Yeah,
You tell
yeah,
me,
for
right?
sure, man.
You're
Yeah, I
you're
feel
you're the
great.
N of one.
Yeah, yeah. What about your own training, man? Like you've a pretty significant low back history, so like how did that happen?
That is just years of probably overtraining. When I was younger, it was sports every day. It was training heavy every day. Not very good recovery. So it was kind of a little use and abuse back then. All I mean, in the time, right? Training was going great. I was feeling like I was reaching my goals. I was getting strong. I was, put on some good size, and but eventually, right, that just put a beating on, and the injury that I felt, I'm sure that the disc issue was there prior. But the way I felt it was I was playing softball, came in on a line drive that was hit towards me, had to make a quick move to my left, and it was just like that was it. I hit the floor pretty much. I had to crawl off the field. And that lingered around for like 6 to 9 months. And then there's been issues
Whoa.
pretty much since then. So it just had to alter the way that I train, right? I was still able to get back to training pretty heavy. I was big into kind of like the powerlifting, for quite a while, the big three. I use the same principles I used from when I was doing strength and conditioning on myself. And then it shifted somewhat recent where I've been using more the FRC principles as far as mobility goes in conjunction with typical strength training stuff. And then a little bit more recently, FRC, the functional range systems, they have a certification that they call the internal strength model. I haven't taken it yet, but I've been working with a coach who has done it before just to give me some exposure to it. And the idea is that, lifting weights, right, is like a way for us, it's an external load, right? So where our bodies are responding to the forces that are acting on our body. Very easy for us to over push, do a little bit too much, right? Because you can compensate and do all sorts of weird things, right? The idea with internal strength is how do we put our bodies into various positions and range positions that we never really would train, and can we actually produce these strong, can you produce force in those positions? And what I found in just a short period of time doing it is that it's actually, because stress is stress, right? I mean, it doesn't matter how the forces are acting on the body, right? It's just non-traditional for, I guess, what we're all used to. I've actually been feeling better, feeling stronger. And funny enough, I was actually just telling a client about this, is using this model. I haven't done push-ups in a while. There's actually a short period of time right before I started doing this that I didn't train for a few months. So I was only able to do 5 push-ups consecutively. I have not done push-ups in any way, shape, or form. That would be like, normally if I wanted to get that back up into the 20s, I'd probably need like 2 months of just like however I would program it. And without doing really any push-ups at all, just by doing this training, I was able to do 23 straight just yesterday. And that was like a 4-week difference. It was like, actually, I was like, how's that even possible? I'm surprised I was able to do 23, because usually it's just like an endurance thing for me. I would just need to build that back up. But yeah, so it's kind of just blending this mobility stuff with the strength training stuff, and all my sessions. It's not like I was breaking it up with mobility days here and strength days here, and now the strength and mobility work are all kind of just here together in one day. So I do that about 4 or 5 days a week. And then I just been adding 2 days of energy system work. So either some sort of like HIIT style circuit that gets my heart rate up, and then some sort of, long, like zone 2, or maybe I've been doing the Peloton, so whatever that tends to challenge me at, 1 time a week as well. So just kind of also exploring a little bit more of that, which I haven't done too much in the past because I hate doing that kind of stuff.
Yeah, man, everyone's on zone 2 from Atia and Huberman, and everyone's like, yeah, we need to do more of that.
Yeah.
Can you explain internal strength model a bit more? That's super interesting.
Yeah, so again, I haven't taken the certification, but all of the functional range stuff, they it's all about force and load. So they would argue that force is the language of cells, right? So without some sort of stress on the body, your body's not going to adapt in a positive way, right? And we can look at bed rest as the complete opposite example, right? If someone's on bed rest, they're in the hospital and they're in the bed for 7 days, cardiac output significantly drops, muscle mass and atrophy, is a main problem, and health declines significantly with just a short amount of period on bed rest, right? So that tells you, right, like our bodies require some sort of stress to adapt in a way that we want it to, right? So the goal with it all is, how do we start to create as much active control as possible? How do we start to create strength? And not just like, if we look at traditional strength training, I would call that or the system would call that mid-range training, right? When you're squatting, when you're deadlifting, when you're bench pressing or dumbbell pressing or push-ups, whatever, right? Like we're moving through a full range of motion, but we're never getting to our very end ranges, right? We're never challenging like shoulder internal rotation or external rotation at these very, very end ranges. And what we do know is that over time, if you don't explore those positions, that's the main reason why people lose mobility over time. Right? It's not because you turn 40 or 50, it's because you haven't put your hand up here in full shoulder flexion in 10 years, and your body is going to atrophy those mechanoreceptors and the things that get you there, because our body wants to be as energy efficient as possible. So we want to spend time in those positions. We want to spend time producing force in those positions. So isometrics, concentric contractions, eccentric contractions. How can we start to load those end ranges to build up strength within those ranges? And typically when we're looking at mobility, if you can say, I don't know, your shoulder flexion is only 160 degrees for whatever reason, if we can start to get you strong in those ranges, it's going to start to open up more ability for you to get even further. Because if we look at that strength curve, right, we're always strongest in the mid ranges, we're always weakest at those end ranges. And as we get stronger towards our end ranges, it's going to push out that curve a little bit more. And it's also going to teach your body and your nervous system, right, all the Golgi tendon organs and all the fun stuff that lives within our nervous system, as we produce stronger contractions at the end ranges of motion, is going to, your nervous system is going to give you more space to move. Usually the sensation of tightness that people feel, it's a nervous system response, right? Your body's saying, hey, we don't want you to move any further than this because we feel like you can't go any further. And the second we start to produce force, get stronger within those ranges, then all of a sudden your body starts to allow more, and it almost resets the muscle spindles, the Golgi tendon organs, and all the things that, you know, kind of dictate, where our end ranges kind of live, so we can start building mobility that way.
Wow. Okay. And is that going to increase your strength potential now that you have like a longer, a wider range of ability for the muscle to contract? If
Yeah,
you're able to go like
yeah. So the whole idea
technical.
is creating movement variability, right? I mean, nothing's ever perfect, right? And if we take, let's say, we'll go back to just general strength training. If you do 1 RM on a deadlift, right, your spine's going to flex. If we do the same thing on a squat, right, your knees are probably going to come in. If we can start to train your body in these positions and get you stronger, you're going to have more resiliency and a better opportunity to do those things, when things aren't perfect. If we only train under the perfect model that we create in strength training, it doesn't give us the flexibility to be strong in when things aren't perfect, right? Which happens all the time, right? If you play sports, if you train, if you do anything, right? You go down stairs, right? Your knees past your toes, right? Like if you go down to pick something up, your spine has to flex, right? Obviously, those things are unloaded. They're not, problematic, but for some people, those things are problematic. And if they are problematic for somebody just to bend forward, well, how can you possibly deadlift somebody or hinge somebody, because those tissues are probably not going to be able to tolerate those forces very well. So yes, to circle back, you start training this way, you have more movement variability, you have strength within more ranges of motion. You're not ignoring those mid ranges. So you're still training your whatever you typically do. And that combination of things can become very powerful for somebody to get stronger, feel better, move better. It just gives your body more tools to do its job.
Very cool, man. Yeah, I'm gonna look into that. I'm doing actually work with range of strength, Lucas Aaron. He's
Yep.
so I I think it's similar concept wise, but
I
I'm
think so
not sure.
too. I know they use, I think that's all more like gymnastics body style stuff. So it's still load under, like you're still training your end ranges, you're doing all that fun stuff. I know some people who do that type of training have also done FRC. So I'm sure they blend, all that stuff is kind of blended together. But he also does a lot of like old strongman type of
Yeah.
training as well, right? So that's all fun. So
Hmm.
yeah, I mean, those again, I don't think FRC like functional range systems they've done anything new. Like the isometrics at end ranges are around from PNF and gymnastics and all that fun stuff. It's just the way that they've systematized mobility work, which is kind of refreshing, and not many people have done that. And I know that that body from what Lucas does also has kind of dove into stuff as well. I haven't gone into those specific systems, but I doubt that they're vastly different. They just might look different
Yeah.
on how you're prescribing certain things.
Yeah, like FRC, it's just everyone I know who's into FRC, like they move great and they seem to be really switched on coaches. So it's yeah, it's hard to come up with a completely novel idea today, but it's I think, packaging how it's delivered, all these things is the important thing. Let's
Yeah, I mean, if you look at all systems, their underlying messages are all the same. There's not all too much difference in what people are saying, and they just do things differently to get there.
yeah, let's jump into some rapid fire, mate, to wrap
Shoot.
things up. One thing you've changed your mind on recently being, let's just say the last 2 years.
Hmm. 2 years. Let's see here. I think it's just more or less on a little. I think in the last 2 years, I found energy system work to be more part of a priority in what I do with myself and with others. Aerobic training in general has shown to be very beneficial for those in chronic pain, with those with like fibromyalgia. Obviously, cardiovascular health is very important in general for people, right? So prioritizing that a little bit more has been something I've done the last 2 years. And then just shifting my mindset a little bit as far as, I've been using even like the terms of rating perceived symptom and stuff like that, and pain guidelines a little bit more over that time. But I'd probably say the just adding some aerobic work is probably the big change that I've had over the last 2 years for sure.
I'm smiling because I had Anthony Vanatakis. He's in the mentorship program as well. He said the same thing.
Yeah, that's funny. I
He
mean,
was on like,
I ran track when I was in high school. I hate running with like all passions.
yeah,
I do enjoy bike riding and stuff like that, so that's always been kind of like my outlet for doing that stuff. And it's just been too hot here in the summer, so having the Peloton's been helpful. And then just I've been adding in like some sort of circuit training into my program of recently as well. So yeah, it's just one of those things that's not quite fun to do, at least for me, but kind of one of those
yeah,
necessary evils.
yeah, for sure, man. Uh, if you could sit down with someone for 2 to 3 hours and pick their brain over dinner, who would it be and why?
Oh boy, that's a hard question. I saw this in the rapid fire question. I never have a good answer to these questions because I never think of these things. Um, I don't know. Let's skip that one because I don't know if I have a good answer for
Sure, mate.
that.
What are you most grateful for and why?
I would say right now, definitely family. We had the birth of our daughter very recently. She's 9 months old, so definitely grateful for that, and they're grateful for the opportunity to be completely remote right now, so I can watch her grow, spend plenty of time with her, and stuff like that. So that's been awesome.
That's great, man. What book or books would you recommend? We can maybe talk about a fiction book and then maybe some sort of a training, fitness, or nutrition book.
Okay, let's see. So I will go. I don't read too much fiction, which is something I want to get into. So I don't know if I'll have a good answer for that. I do remember loving Dante's Inferno when I read it a long, long time ago. So we'll put that out there.
Okay.
Um, and then I'll throw out Perfect Day Formula from Craig Ballantyne. That's been a great book to help me kind of like organize my days a little bit better. And, it's all about kind of like prioritizing like your biggest thing first. So that I say that book is a good one to read. And then if you're looking at something on like the strength side of things or the fitness side of things, Easy Strength by Dan John is it's a pretty solid read.
That's
First one
such
that
a good book,
came
man.
to mind. So
Yeah. Anything Dan John, guys, he's the man. Awesome. And yeah, that Craig Ballantyne book is great. That's actually the 10-3-2-1-0, which is kind of blown up in the last year or two. Everyone's talking about it. Like that's from his book was the first place I saw it, which I'm pretty sure I'm gonna say it's kind of his idea, I'm guessing. Um, last question. If you could put something on a billboard in Times Square or somewhere you'd reach millions of people, what would it be and why?
move daily. That's it. Very simple. Move daily, just getting people to just remind them to do something for their body, even if it's 5 minutes every single day, just to keep things going, keep things loose, and that's it. I think is a great habit for people to get into.
Great, man. And then a link to your Instagram and website.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
That wouldn't be
yeah.
too bad of
That'd
of
be
a follow up, but move daily. That's all we need.
that's great,
But
man.
if
Yeah,
I
super
can, yeah,
simple.
super
It
simple.
fixes so many issues as well, right? Like if you can just move
Yeah,
every day, you're gonna sort out a lot of your problems.
yeah. I started doing that. I don't know if you know Max Schenk, but he
Yeah.
used to do these like 5 minute flows all the time way back when. So I started doing that. Started feeling pretty good from doing that. It was just a good way to just like unscripted move. And now with like FRC, I just take the 10 minutes to do my cars and hit all my end ranges and just kind of it's like a self assessment tool as well. So just check in with how the body's feeling, and that's kind of just what I've been kind of going through now.
Yeah, that's just such good advice, man. Like literally just 5 minutes a day is pretty amazing how much of an impact that has on just some gentle joint mobility, go through your hips, your wrists, your shoulders, that type of stuff. Awesome, bro. Really, you shared so much stuff. I'm gonna have to listen to this 2 or 3 times because you also just kind of said stuff, like da, 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 and I was like, there's so much gold that you shared today that I think we could definitely unpackage much more. But yeah, I really appreciate everything you shared. You clearly are really switched on. You know what you're talking about. Where can people learn more about you, mate? If they want to look at content or like, what's the best place to find out more about you and what you do?
Yep. Best places would be Instagram at Joe Gambino DPT, and then my website, joegambinodpt.com. So very, very easy to find me.
Awesome, man. I'll make sure and hook all that into the show notes as well. Okay.
Thank you.